The first shock hit when my son walked away from me at gate 47, rolling his suitcase without looking back. People stared. I stood there holding my boarding pass with shaking hands, the loudspeaker calling his flight while my chest burned with embarrassment. The smell of burnt coffee mixed with jet fuel hung in the air, and the cold airport floor seemed to rise up through my shoes. He turned once, smirked, and said loud enough for others to hear, "You're not my problem anymore." Then he laughed, a short, cruel laugh. Silence followed, thick and awkward. Travelers avoided my eyes. A child stopped crying. Even the announcements seemed to pause. That's when the stranger stepped forward. He wore a dark suit and carried no luggage. Calm, confident, he looked straight at me and said my name. Not loudly, not softly, just enough to cut through the silence. "Mr. Harris." I froze. I didn't know him. He placed his hand gently on my shoulder and turned to the airport staff. "This man will not be left here," he said. His voice carried authority, the kind that doesn't need to shout. People began to look. Phones lifted. A ripple of attention moved through the gate. My son stopped walking. The gate agent's posture changed. Her face went pale. "Yes, sir," she said quickly, typing fast. Security stepped closer, not to me, but to my son. "What's going on?" my son snapped, his smile gone. The stranger looked at him once. "You might want to sit down." Gasps moved through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" My son's face drained of color as a supervisor hurried over, nodding again and again to the stranger. I noticed then the pin on his lapel. Small, official, familiar in a way I couldn't place. And the way everyone suddenly treated me, with respect, with care, made my stomach tighten. There was something my son didn't know, something I hadn't told him. As my son stammered, trying to explain, the stranger leaned closer to me and said, "It's time they know the truth." I looked at the departure board. The time blinked 10:17 a.m. And just like that, I was pulled back to 20 years earlier, to the day I made a promise that would change everything. If you think this ends at an airport gate, you're wrong. What happened next would make my son wish he'd never left me standing there alone. Subscribe for powerful, real-life stories that reveal hidden truths and emotional justice. Comment below. What do you think the stranger's real identity is, and what should the son face next? 20 years earlier at 10:17 a.m., I stood in a much smaller airport holding my son's tiny hand. He was 6 years old, wearing a jacket 2 sizes too big, dragging a toy plane across the floor. He kept asking if his mother would come back before our flight boarded. She never did. That was the day everything changed, though he was too young to understand it. I gave him my job offer overseas that morning, a powerful one that came with security, status, and a future most people only dream about. I chose my son instead. I chose silence. I chose to disappear from a world that would have put him in danger if anyone knew who I really was. For years, I raised him alone. I packed his lunches, I sat in plastic school chairs during parent meetings, I worked night shifts and slept on buses. I never told him why some people treated me differently when they recognized my name. I never explained why I avoided cameras, or why men in suits sometimes nodded at me in public places. To him, I was just an old-fashioned, quiet father. To him, I was embarrassing. As he grew older, the distance started. He stopped calling, stopped inviting me to important events. When he got his first real job, he told me not to visit the office. "You wouldn't fit in," he said once, laughing like it was a joke. By the time we reached the airport this morning, he was already annoyed. He walked fast, checked his phone constantly, and sighed every time I asked a question. Then, right before security, he snapped. "I booked my ticket, you book yours. We're not traveling together," he said. I reminded him gently that he had insisted I come, that he said he needed help. That's when he raised his voice. That's when people started looking, and that's when he left me alone at the gate, like I was a stranger to him. Now, back in the present, my son stood frozen as airport staff surrounded him. His confidence was gone. His voice shook as he said my name for the first time in years, not with anger, but fear. "Dad, what did you do?" The stranger hadn't answered yet. He was watching my son closely, like a man looking at a problem that had finally reached its deadline. And then he said something that made my son's knees weaken. "Your father didn't abandon power," the stranger said. "He hid it to protect you." And that was only the beginning. My son stared at the stranger like he had spoken another language. The crowd around us leaned in, pretending not to listen. The airport no longer felt loud. Every sound seemed far away, like we were sealed inside a glass box. "What power?" my son asked, forcing a laugh. "He's just my dad." The stranger didn't smile. He reached into his jacket and showed a badge, only for a second, but it was enough. The gate supervisor's hands began to shake. She nodded again, stepping back as if she'd crossed an invisible line. "Sir," she said to me quietly, "we'll take care of everything." My son's face tightened. What is this, some kind of joke? I opened my mouth to stop it, but the stranger spoke first. "Your father once ran operations through this very airport," he said. "Security, clearances, decisions that affected thousands of lives every day." My son's eyes widened. "That's impossible." "It was before your time," the stranger replied. "Before he chose you." I felt my throat burn. Memories rushed back. Long nights, sealed rooms, names I was never allowed to write down. I had buried that life so deeply that even I forgot it sometimes. "You told me you fixed machines," my son said, turning to me. His voice cracked. "You said you were nobody." "I said I was ordinary," I answered softly, "because that's what you needed me to be." People were openly watching now. No one laughed, no one whispered. The mocking smiles from earlier were gone. Even the man who had rolled his eyes when my son abandoned me now looked ashamed. The stranger continued, calm but firm. "When your mother left, powerful people wanted your father back. He refused. He signed documents that erased him from public records, all to give you a normal childhood." My son took a step back, as if the ground shifted under him. "So all those times," he whispered, "the men who came to the house, the calls you never answered, were dangers," I said, "ones I didn't want near you." Tears filled his eyes, but pride fought them back. "Then why now? Why show up today?" The stranger finally looked at me. "Because someone used his name without permission," he said, "and because abandoning him publicly crossed a line." Security moved closer to my son, not to arrest him, but to guide him aside, gently, respectfully, the same way they now treated me. "Your flight is delayed," the supervisor told my son, "indefinitely." His knees nearly gave out. I realized then this wasn't about punishment, it was about truth, and truth, once spoken, cannot be unheard. But the hardest part was still coming, because what my son was about to learn next would change not just his future, but mine too. They guided us into a quiet, glass-walled room near the terminal, the kind used for VIPs and emergencies. Water appeared on the table without anyone asking. The stranger stood by the door, arms crossed, watching everything. My son sat across from me, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Say it," he demanded, "all of it. No more secrets." I took a slow breath. "I used to authorize travel bans," I said. "I could stop a plane from taking off with one call. I reviewed threat lists, names, faces. Some of them are still classified." His mouth fell open. "That's why I knew today would end badly," I continued. "This airport isn't just concrete and gates to me. It's history. It remembers me. even if you didn't." The stranger nodded. When his name appeared in the system this morning, alerts triggered, not because he was traveling, but because he was being mistreated. My son looked up sharply. Mistreated? Public abandonment of a protected individual, the stranger said evenly. That still matters. My son's voice dropped to a whisper. Protected? From me? No one answered right away. The silence was heavier than before. I never wanted protection, I said. I wanted a son. His shoulders began to shake. Then why did you let me treat you like that for years? Because love doesn't keep score, and because one day I hoped you'd choose me without fear or obligation. The stranger checked his watch. There's something else, he said, something you deserve to know now. He placed a sealed folder on the table and slid it toward my son. Your father isn't being recalled, he said. He's being cleared. My son frowned. Cleared for what? For visibility, the stranger replied. His name will no longer be hidden. I felt my heart stop. That was never the deal. The deal changed, the stranger said quietly, because your son is no longer a child, and because the world needs you again. My son looked between us, overwhelmed. What happens if he says no? The stranger met his eyes. Then others decide for him. The room felt suddenly too small. Outside the glass, planes began to move again. Boarding calls echoed. Life continued, unaware that a decision was forming that could rewrite everything. I realized then, the greatest test wasn't my past. It was whether my son could accept who I really was, and whether I could step back into a life I once sacrificed, even if it meant losing him all over again. My son pushed the folder away like it could burn him. No, he said, you don't get to drag him back into danger. He's done enough. The stranger raised an eyebrow. That's not your decision. My son stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. It should be. I'm his son. I looked up at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in years, I saw fear instead of arrogance. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing me. I survived before you, I said gently, and I'll survive after this. But hiding forever was never safety. It was waiting. He shook his head. You think I don't remember? The locked doors? You checking windows at night? You telling me never to use your full name? I remember, I said. I remember why. The stranger stepped closer. There's increased activity, he said. People who assumed your father was gone are testing boundaries. Today was a probe, not by the sun, but around him. My son's face drained of color. You're saying I was used? Unknowingly, the stranger replied. Your public rejection created a signal, a confirmation. Silence fell again. This one was different, sharp, dangerous. I stood up. Then this ends now. Both of them looked at me. I won't disappear again, I said, and I won't let my son be a weakness in someone else's plan. My son's voice broke. You were never a weakness. I reached across the table and took his hand. He didn't pull away. For years, I let you believe I was small because it kept you safe. But today you learned the truth in the worst possible way. The stranger nodded once, respectful. There is one condition, he said. If you return, your son must be fully briefed. No more shadows. My son's grip tightened around my hand. Outside the room, a supervisor waited. Sir, she said to me, your decision is needed. I looked at my son, really looked this time, the boy I raised, the man he became, the mistake he made. I'll return, I said slowly, but not alone. My son's eyes widened. You mean? Yes, I said. If my name comes back into the light, so does the truth. The stranger opened the door, and as we stepped out, I knew one thing for certain. The world was about to learn who I really was, and my son was about to learn what it truly means to stand beside someone instead of walking away. The walk through the terminal felt unreal. People stepped aside without knowing why. No announcements were made, yet doors opened before we reached them. My son noticed everything now. The quiet nods, the subtle gestures, the way eyes followed us with respect. "This is what you lived with?" he whispered. I nodded. Every day, I just learned how to carry it quietly. Inside a private lounge, the stranger finally introduced himself. "You can call me Daniel," he said. "I was one of your father's last trainees." My son looked at me sharply. "Trainees?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Your father taught people how to stay calm when everything is at risk, how to choose restraint instead of power." My son swallowed. "He doesn't look dangerous." "That's why he was," Daniel replied. A screen on the wall lit up with security footage, timestamps, names, flagged movements. Daniel pointed to a still image of my son and me at the gate. "This moment," he said, "went live in 3 internal systems. It told the wrong people that your father was isolated." My son's shoulders slumped. "Because of me." I placed a hand on his back. "Because of confusion," I said, "not cruelty." Daniel continued, "We've contained it, but only if your father steps back into the role, publicly." "And if I don't?" I asked. "Then someone else fills the vacuum," Daniel said. "Someone without your restraint." The room felt colder. My son looked up at me, eyes red. "I spent years being ashamed of you," he said. "I thought you were weak. I thought leaving you today would finally prove I'd outgrown you." He laughed bitterly. "Turns out I was the child." I shook my head. "You were human." He took a deep breath. "If you do this, I won't run again." Daniel nodded approvingly. "Good, because what comes next won't be quiet." A phone buzzed on the table. Daniel checked it and frowned. "We have a complication." My heart tightened. "What kind?" Daniel turned the screen towards us. It showed a familiar name, one I hadn't seen in decades. My son read it aloud, confused. "Mom?" Daniel's voice dropped. "She's in the building." The air left my lungs. Not everything from the past stays buried. Some things wait, and whatever reason she had for showing up now, I knew it wasn't accidental. My son stood up slowly. "That's not possible," he said. "She hasn't called in years." Daniel's face stayed serious. "She didn't come through public security," he replied. "She used an old clearance, one that should have been inactive." I felt a familiar chill. "Only 3 people still have access to that code," I said quietly. Daniel nodded, "and one of them just checked in." The lounge door opened before my son could ask another question. She walked in like time hadn't touched her. Same straight posture, same sharp eyes, only her hair had gone gray at the edges. When she saw me, her expression didn't soften, it hardened. "So," she said, looking between me and our son, "you finally stopped hiding." My son's voice shook. "You left us." She didn't look at him. "I left danger," she said, "and I see it followed anyway." I stood. "You promised never to use that clearance again." She gave a cold smile. "Promises expire when secrets resurface." Daniel stepped in. "Ma'am, this is a restricted—" "I know exactly where I am," she cut in. "I helped design these rooms." My son's head snapped toward me. "Design?" I closed my eyes for a moment. "Your mother wasn't just my wife," I said. "She was my partner." The silence that followed was heavy and sharp. She finally looked at our son, really looked at him. "You abandoned your father today," she said. "That mistake announced him to people who never forgot his name." Tears welled in my son's eyes. "Why didn't you come back for us?" Her jaw tightened. Because loving him meant enemies. Loving you meant targets. Daniel's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then at me. "Sir," he said carefully, "external interest is escalating, faster than expected." My ex-wife turned to me. "You have minutes, not hours," she said. "If you step back into the light, there will be consequences." I looked at my son. He was shaking, but he didn't step away. "I'm not leaving again, either of you." For the first time, something in her eyes cracked. "Then listen carefully," she said, "because what happens next isn't about airports or pride. It's about survival." Outside, alarms didn't sound. Flights weren't delayed. But somewhere beyond the glass walls, old players were moving again. And this time, they knew all our names. She leaned over the table and lowered her voice. "There are 3 groups watching you now," she said. "One wants your father back. One wants him silenced. And one wants to use your public rejection as leverage." My son's fists clenched. "Use me how?" "As proof he's vulnerable," she replied, "as bait." Daniel nodded. "We've already intercepted 2 inquiries. Both referenced the gate incident." I felt a deep, steady calm settle over me, the same calm I hadn't felt in 20 years. "Then we stop reacting," I said. "We control the narrative." My ex-wife studied me for a long moment. "You always did think 3 moves ahead." I turned to my son. "You remember the rules I taught you when you were little?" He sniffed, confused. "Stay quiet, watch everything, never panic." I nodded. "And never stand alone." Daniel straightened. "We can move you to a secure location," he said to my son, "immediately." "No," my son said firmly. "I stay with him, publicly." My ex-wife exhaled sharply. "That's dangerous." "It's honest," my son replied. "I spent years pretending I didn't need him. I won't do it again." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "That choice protects me more than any clearance." Daniel's phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't hide the screen. "They're already spinning the story," he said. "A viral clip. Elderly man abandoned by son at airport. Sympathy is building." My ex-wife smiled grimly. "Good. Let them see him as weak." I looked at her. "And then?" "And then," she said, "we remind them why he was feared." A plan formed quickly, too quickly for comfort. A controlled appearance. One statement, no explanations. Daniel looked at me. "If you do this, there's no going back." I met his eyes. I went back the moment my son walked away. My son swallowed. "What do you need from me?" I smiled softly. "Just stand next to me." Outside the lounge, cameras were already waiting. News crews sensed something. Security cleared a path. My ex-wife paused at the door and looked back at us. "This is your last chance to stay invisible," she said. I took a step forward. "Invisible didn't save us," I replied. As the doors opened and the lights hit our faces, I felt the weight of the past lift. But the real test was still ahead, because the first question they were about to ask would force my son to choose who he was in front of the entire world. The cameras flashed the moment we stepped out. Voices shouted questions from every direction. "Sir, were you abandoned? Is it true your son left you at the airport?" For a second, my son froze. I felt it, the old instinct to step in front of him, to shield him. But this time, I didn't. I stayed where I was. My son took one step forward. "No," he said clearly, "I didn't abandon my father." The noise dipped. "I made a mistake," he continued, his voice steady now, "and I fixed it, because this man spent his life protecting me, even when I didn't deserve it." I looked at him, stunned. A reporter turned to me. "Sir, there are rumors about your past, about power, about influence." I nodded once. "Rumors exist when truth is hidden," I said. "I'm not here to threaten anyone. I'm here to stand beside my son." Cameras zoomed in. The story shifted in real time. No longer shame, no longer mockery, respect. Behind the crowd, I saw officials watching, old faces, careful eyes. They recognized the tone, the restraint, the warning without words. My ex-wife watched from a distance, arms crossed. For the first time, she smiled, not with fear, but with relief. Daniel leaned close. "It's done," he whispered. "They understand." My son exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. He turned to me. "I'm sorry," he said. Not quietly, not privately, but where it mattered. I placed a hand on his back. That's all I ever needed. The departure board behind us flickered. Flights resumed. Life moved on. But for me, everything had changed. I was no longer hidden. My son was no longer ashamed. And the world had been reminded of one simple truth. You never know who someone really is until you see who stands with them when walking away would be easier. If this story moved you, subscribe for more powerful real-life stories. And comment below, would you have forgiven him